Okay, in this video we're going to be talking about the ERC20 standard for tokens on Ethereum. So tokens on Ethereum are a certain kind of contract that are some of the most popular, widely used kinds of contracts on Ethereum so far. If you look at Etherscan, for example, they have an entire menu option dedicated to tokens. If you look at the ERC20 top tokens, what you'll see is each one of the ERC20 tokens that you see here is some smart contract that basically implements its own digital currency. So it's separate from Ether. You can hold Ether in your MetaMask account. You can also hold some portion of any of these ERC20 tokens. And you can also transfer them to other people and in some cases trade them on exchanges, which we'll talk about later. So the ERC20 standard consists of a set of function declarations, function interfaces that you need to implement so that tools like Etherscan and MetaMask Wallet and others will know how to interact with and interpret the data in your token smart contract. So this slide just lists a few of them. There are a bunch more. The first handful are about defining some basic functionality for the contract, such as a constant function total supply that says how many of the tokens of this given type of token there are. A balance of method, that's a getter field, it's constant, and it lets you determine what is the current balance associated with a given Ethereum address. And also a transfer method, which lets you transfer some ERC20 tokens you have to a different address. So here I have an example of an ERC20 token contract. It's not very complicated, and I won't walk through all of the parts of the code. Mainly it has a subpublic member field, which is a mapping which keeps track of how many of these tokens each address has. It defines the transfer event, which is emitted every time a transfer occurs. And the main interesting function here is the transfer function itself, which has a bunch of conditions. For example, it makes sure that you can't transfer to someone more tokens than you have, and if that check passes, then it updates all of the fields accordingly. It also defines the public constant fields like the name of the token, a shorter symbol for it, and the number of decimal places that it has. It also has some other features that allow you to create tokens for yourself by transferring testnet ether to it, checking your balance, and withdrawing testnet ether for it. Basically implements tokens that are backed by testnet ether. So here I have an instance of this contract already installed on the Ropsten testnet. And since Etherscan knows how to interpret the ERC20 token standard, I can show you what it looks like when ERC20 shows me information about this contract that I just created. So you can see that it keeps track of the total number of the tokens that are issued, the total supply. Refresh it here, it keeps track of how many different addresses are holders of the contract, meaning they have some balance of, some non-zero balance of, and how many transfer events it recognizes from the transfer event being emitted, as well as information like the number of decimal places, and it gets the name of the token and the symbol also by calling those read-only methods defined according to the standard. As another example of interfaces that are aware of this standard, I can show you what it looks like in MetaMask. So here's MetaMask. You can see the amount of testnet ether that I have. I can also go down here to where there's an add tokens pane, and I can now add ERC20 tokens that I'm interested in. So I can search for different tokens that it's aware of. In this case, since this is just a test token, I'm going to have to copy the address manually to add it. I have this copied in my clipboard, so I'm going to add the address like this. You can see it figures out the symbol and the number of decimal places automatically. And now when I add it, it shows up as next to the amount of testnet ether. I can see the amount of this testnet token that I have. Now that I have this amount of testnet tokens, I can also make a transaction to send tokens, which is going to be a transaction that invokes the transfer method. So here I'm going to send some amount of these tokens to something else, to one of my other accounts. I could send a maximum of one of these tokens because that's how much I have right here. I'm going to send 0.2. And now when I hit next and confirm this transaction, it's pending. I'll check back in just a second. Okay, now that this transaction's confirmed, we can click on it and see the details. And what I would expect to see is that it recognizes that the effect of this transaction was transferring 0.2 of these testnet tokens. If we go look at the event logs, you'll see that the transfer event was created just like we would expect. Okay, so that's basically it. There's not really that much to it. It's pretty simple. ERC20 is just a handful of standard function types that, by following them, make it easy for various tools like the Etherscan Explorer and the MetaMask wallet to be able to keep track of your tokens. Now, this particular token contract that we created, there's a few ways that you can interact with it. We'll give you exactly the address corresponding to this transaction I used in this demo. First of all, if you paste your address, then we can transfer you a balance of this token. You can also get some tokens yourself. If you notice, there's a fallback method here that takes deposits. Well, if you make a transaction that sends some amount of testnet ether, like you got from the previous exercise of getting testnet ether from a faucet, then however much testnet ether you send to this contract, it's going to give you proportionally that many tokens. So as I said, it's kind of like a contract backed by testnet ether. You can also, if you want, call the withdraw ether method, and you'll get some testnet ether back if you already had a balance of tokens in this contract. So those are a couple of things you could do to interact with it. So given how simple this is, what's the big fuss about all of these tokens? Well, what makes the tokens interesting is usually the other additional smart contract code that does things in addition to just being a token. So we'll talk about a couple of examples of how a smart contract can have auctions built in corresponding to the token interface as well. We'll also look in one of the later videos on how tokens can be used on various decentralized exchanges that do atomic swaps of tokens for other tokens or for digital currency like Ether.